Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to do something a little different. For those listening to the podcast, I have a YouTube channel which is just named Hyatt Gonzer. And for those on the YouTube channel, I have a new podcast called What the Fuck Am I? That's WTF Am I ? Exclamation mark. And so if you want to check out, if either of you want to check out any of those, then yeah, you can do that. I'll leave the link to my podcast in the YouTube description, and I'll leave a link to my YouTube channel in the podcast show notes. And I thought I'd try recording a video for this one and seeing if I can utilize that for both YouTube and podcasting. And I know that I can also put videos up on Spotify and podcasting platforms, so I'm going to see if I can start doing some video for my podcast and just be able to use this video for both platforms. And normally I have the phone like right up to my mouth when I'm recording a podcast, so hopefully the audio quality and my voice still sounds pretty much the same, even though the camera's a little further away from me. I'm always in my van doing these recordings, and I think it'd be pretty sweet to sometime soon get a legitimate mic and maybe some other equipment and kind of just like make this my little recording studio in the back of the van. I mean, it already kind of is, but I want to take it to the next level if I can. So in this episode, I want to talk about different holistic, kind of systematic ways of thinking about reality, kind of the philosophies that I sort of believe in that are kind of more of an infinite, mysterious nature. And so I'm going to be referencing different ideas and philosophies, such as internal family systems, holons, strange loops, maybe fractals, these sorts of things, and sort of tying them all together. And so I'm going to be doing what you might call a bit of like parts talk, which is kind of this idea of systems and parts, and that everything is basically one small part of something else, and that nothing is really like basically everything is whole unto itself, and also everything is a part of some other thing that's whole. And I think for me, one core sort of principle of this is that nothing really knows or experiences all of what it is. So as a human being, we kind of experience some conscious level of what we are and who we are, but we don't experience every part of ourselves. We don't experience what it's like to be each individual cell. We don't experience what it's like to be the heart. We don't experience what it's like to be bacteria that forms our body. We don't experience what it's like to be the hair on our head. We don't experience what it's like to be every individual thought to the fullest extent. And so we kind of have all these things that make up who we are, but we can't really experience every part of us all at the same time. And I think that a great introduction to parts thinking is internal family systems, which is a therapy model that basically talks about our sort of thoughts and the emotions that arise from our thoughts as being not necessarily us. The idea is that we kind of have an essence, which you'd call the self, which is a very kind of neutral, pretty peaceful, like undisturbed sort of essence or feeling. And then you've got pretty much all these other parts of you that you feel really attached to, that kind of have desires and have attachments to those desires. And so in internal family systems, there's basically kind of three roles or three parts in the model, which is the exile, which is kind of the parts of us that we reject and we suppress and we don't really let it come to the surface, because in the past, like these exiles are parts of ourselves and they're part of our authenticity in a way. But we have experienced in the past usually that these parts of ourselves aren't accepted, and generally some part of the outside world, like our parents or society or whatever, has rejected this part of ourself, and therefore we reject that part of ourselves, so that way we can still kind of be in the tribe and be able to have all the comforts and necessities and like emotional care that we get from relating to others, and not being scrutinized by others. So we kind of repress different parts of us that are not accepted. And then you have manager parts, which really like control, and they're really dedicated to helping you feel kind of as good as possible. They don't always do it in an unhealthy way. In fact, I would imagine they probably never do it in an unhealthy way, because if they were healthy, they probably wouldn't be manager parts. They would be more integrated. But they're very analytical, and they're trying to like make decisions for us that are going to keep us secure based on usually our past or what could happen in the future. And so they're often trying to control other people, situations, and other exiled parts that are trying to come up to the surface. These exiled parts are always wanting to like voice themselves and to express themselves in us. But we have manager parts that try to keep that under control, because if they come up, then the manager parts of us are scared that we're going to be rejected in some way or something like that. Like it just won't be safe for these exile parts to come and be accepted up in the surface. And then you have firefighters, who are kind of like the emergency dispatch team. And that's when you get really dysregulated, and you have more like traumatic things coming up that are really strong and that you really can't control. Like you're about to erupt. And often it's like these exiled parts that are coming up that are about to erupt, and firefighters will kind of come in and really do anything they can to distract you. And that could look like, doing drugs, eating, like going and eating food. There's suppressing mechanisms to not feel things. So it could be like cutting yourself. It could be going to play video games or watch porn or just anything that is going to distract you from these emotions that are erupting to the surface. And I really love this concept because it's kind of telling you that these parts of you aren't necessarily you. It's like we have this whole universe and this whole ecosystem inside of us, and they're all kind of fighting for attention and for what they think is right. And if you ever notice your mind, you'll probably notice that it's often arguing with itself. You have different directions you want to go. You have different interests, and you're like, oh, I want to go over here, but I also want to go over in this direction. Like, which one do I choose? They feel so like equally strong. I don't know what to do. And so you've got these different parts of you that are wanting different things. And I read one time in one of the Conversations with God books, Neil Walsh was asking something about like, where do thoughts come from? And it was a short conversation on this that he was having with God in the book. And at one point, God said that thoughts come from the cells in your body. And then it was like the conversation was over. And I was like, what the heck? You're just going to leave me with that? How does that happen? Why do thoughts come from the cells in our body? And it didn't really give any more of an explanation after that. And kind of with this sort of perspective that I'm sharing here, it all starts to kind of like make more sense to me as I think about it more and more. And so if like a cell is a holon within you, which you are also a holon because you're a part of something bigger, and a cell is a whole thing, but it's also a part of something bigger that's even more, or I wouldn't say even more whole, but it's just a part of a bigger whole thing. And so one way that I've really enjoyed playing around with the ideas of God and reality the last few years is thinking of God or reality as basically a being, and really making it relatable to like being a human, which is probably just very human of me to like put God through that filter of my human lens and try and like relate to it. But in some sense, I think that it makes a lot of sense to do that when you think of reality in this way, where everything's just kind of like a fractal of itself, and we're all just parts of something bigger, and we all sort of reflect in some way that bigger part of us. So if you can imagine that we are also just little cells in some bigger being, and we all have our thoughts going on and our sensations and everything that encompasses our experience, and we're like one little cell. And then within us we've got like these thoughts, like these bickering, arguing thoughts that are always going against each other, contradicting each other, wanting different things. And we like, it brings us so much anxiety sometimes, and just like frustration. Like, what do we do about this freaking thing that just won't shut up in my head? And then you look around at, different people, they might be agreeing and having a great time together, or they might be getting into arguments and fights and trying to win debates and try and come out the person who's right and on top and want power and things like that. And you've got all these different aspects of humanity and different desires. Some people want peace and inclusion, and some people want power and domination and all that, and some people just want to chill and hang out and be and let be. And so if you were to imagine like every different kind of argument within humanity happening all at once, and when we're all sending these signals up towards some higher being or something like that, and then you think of like God being this entity who's just got like all these crazy wild arguments and thoughts in its head, and it's like, why am I thinking this way? What's happening to me? Like, what is all this like push-pull crap that's going on in my head? Where is this coming from? Like, is this me? What the heck am I? Why is my mind doing this? And then you look at a very micro level of like societies that are doing this to each other, and then it's almost, you can think of it as like we're those cells that are creating the thoughts for God, and we're like the different energies and traumas and the different sort of personality types and styles with different desires that are like influencing God's train of thought and God's creation as well. I think that God influences us pretty much just as much as we collectively influence God, and I don't even think that they would be separate things. We're basically all the same. Like, how do you differentiate a cell from you? Like, if the cell is moving through my bloodstream or is on my skin, then it's me. But the moment that I take that cell and maybe like say cut a little piece of my skin off, then we would say that that cell is no longer me. And so it's like, was it ever me? I took that part of me away, but I'm still here. So was that ever actually a part of me? Or like, how does all this work? So when I kind of think about it this way, where everything's just a fractal of itself, and I kind of relate God to, conscious beings like us, then it's easier for me to see how, thoughts could come from the cells in our body. And I've noticed this very acutely with diet, and how when I'm eating a really clean diet, which for me is mostly just a fruit diet, a fruitarian diet, or a really clean raw vegan diet where I'm just eating like raw salads and things like that with not very much fat or protein. That's personally what works for me and puts me into a super blissful state. But it's usually when I'm eating 100% like low fat fruit that my mind just becomes so clear and pristine. It's kind of unbelievable. And I never get like any horrible intrusive thoughts or like bad self-talk or anything like that when I'm eating this diet. It's as if like the whole universe inside of me has come to like this peace treaty, because I'm finally giving what they need. I'm like nourishing them. I'm nourishing the needs of every cell in my body. So now they're kind of just like, oh, all our needs are met. Now we can focus on just like being happy. And so that's kind of one way to think about it. Like, who knows what it is we're all kind of creating together, as in like, who knows what we're all a part of. Like, if you took a huge step back and saw sort of like the body of God that we're all creating, then who knows what that would look like, or if that would be some other living conscious entity with just other living conscious entities within it. And I kind of lost where I was going there with that. But one sort of, I think, visual concept that you can try to follow along with here to help you kind of understand the infinite nature of this is, we've got things like particles and atoms and cells within us, and then there's probably trillions and trillions, maybe hundreds of trillions of cells within our body, and then you probably need like billions of cells to make one organ, and then that one organ is still just a small portion of the size of us as a human being. So you've got humans, which are like some super tiny particle, and then we're on Earth, which probably is just some other super tiny particle that makes up maybe a solar system, which might be like an atom, and then a bunch of atoms make up a galaxy, which might be a cell. And then you've got galaxy clusters, and like I imagine, if you zoom out far enough, you've got like super giant looking galaxy clusters that might make up like one cell in the body of God. And then you get like a billion of those. You zoom out to where you can see a billion of these galaxy clusters, and maybe it forms a constellation that looks kind of like the kidney of God or something like that. And so you've got billions of galaxy clusters, which I don't believe we can, see that with our human technology yet. Like, we can't zoom out far enough to see the sort of like body of the thing that we're creating or the thing that we're inside of. And so now we've got this kidney, which is just like this like really tiny part of our body. And so if you can imagine that all those billions of galaxy clusters is what it takes to create the kidney of God, then you can imagine how far you'd have to zoom out and how many like trillions and trillions of galaxy clusters it would take to form the body of some creature that we're living inside. And so now imagine that, and imagine this like giant creature where we're just like, we're nothing. Like, if we're humans and we're trying to discover the smallest part, like the quarks and just like the tiniest particles within reality, like we haven't even found yet the tiniest particle that would equal what a human is to this giant entity. And like, we're just too small. We're some like crazy quantum particle that like barely exists. And so now you take this giant creature that we're all forming, and now that creature, you can think of it as like the new human. That giant creature that we're inside of is now a human, and guess what? That human is also a holon. It's probably not a human, but whatever it is, whatever kind of like thing that these constellations of like galaxies and whatever else are forming, that thing is now the tiniest particle of an atom inside of a cell, inside of a cluster of cells that are making up the kidney of some greater being. So that this thing we're inside of that we don't even have the technology to fully see, and probably won't be able to fully like zoom out far enough to see for hundreds of years at least. Maybe not, technology is going so quickly, it's crazy. But now that thing that maybe in like 200 years we'll finally be able to see it, that is the tiniest particle within a cell of a being that is even greater than it, like massively, massively greater in size. And then you zoom out all the way, you see that creature, and that's the tiniest particle of a cell. And it just on and on forever, upward and downward into infinity, which takes us into the next concept of a strange loop, which is like, when you think of this, okay, we're all particles within cells within beings, which are cells within beings, which are cells within greater beings. And even with us, like, that's the macro level. Now in the micro level, we can see that within us. A cell is just a tiny little thing within us that we create. And you can zoom into the cell more and more, and you'll find the smallest particle. Once you find the smallest particle within like the atom of a cell, you can blow that up to like infinite proportions and find all the steps again going back down. So like, you'll find like a giant entity within that tiniest particle, and you can explore the organs of that entity that's within this particle that we can't even measure yet, and it'll infinitely keep going all the way down again, like a fractal. And so kind of the concept is that there's this infinite loop, and the most basic way to think of that is that it's all just a circle. It's all looping in. It's a closed loop, so there's no way out of it. It just like continues on forever. And the concept of a strange loop is kind of like the concept of holons. It's like everything is a strange loop. Everything is part of a bigger strange loop. Everything is a strange loop. Everything has strange loops within us. And a strange loop is basically just like something that wraps back around into itself and is just like infinitely, like a figure eight or an infinity sign. That's a strange loop because it's just doing this for infinity and there's no way out. And so that's kind of how you can think of material reality. And even by material reality, I guess I mean even like conceptual reality. It's how you can think of awareness and consciousness is this loop that you can't really get out of. And so we're all kind of just like parts influencing other parts of the whole. And even if it were possible to zoom out all the way to like the biggest, most intelligent consciousness ever, to me it's hard to conceive or like to like fathom that even the most like intelligent, advanced part, like God, you could say, could be experiencing everything all at once, could actually be omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, because it's just not really possible in the sense that even if you have an awareness of everything that's going inside of you, say we have like this consciousness that's able to perceive everything that's happening on an atomic level within us, like we know how all our atoms and cells are working and what it's like to be all of them at the same time. That's still limited because if you're God and you know what it's like to be everything all at the same time, then you also don't know what it's like to be only one thing all the time and nothing else. And that might be a little difficult to wrap your head around. I don't know if I, did a great job of saying that, but it's like, if God is aware of everyone and what they're going through and knows their experience, then God doesn't actually know my personal experience. God doesn't know what it's like to be Hyatt and to only be Hyatt and to feel like this exclusion and all these personal feelings of mine. Like maybe I can send those signals back to God along with everyone else so God can get some sense of it, as if we're like just like nerve endings that are constantly sending signals back to the brain, so that way God can kind of like interpret and make its next move, or like use that information to figure out more about itself or figure out what it wants next and its desires and all that. But it could never fully embody me and my desires. And you could say that it does because I'm here being me. And so like I basically am God, like experiencing what it's like to just be Hyatt. And you're you experiencing what it's just like to be you and nothing else. And so in this way, it's like we're all able to encompass all of reality, but we're also all parts that can never be fully understood by anyone else. So it's not like there's any part of reality that can fully understand everything that's going on. We're basically just like little tiny bacteria that God may hardly even be aware of. And even if it's like using a microscope on us, that's like, oh wow, there's little creatures inside of me, then it likely doesn't know our experience. There's another little thing that happened to me a couple years ago, which I thought was really interesting. It was kind of spontaneous and it wasn't something that I like had planned out, but it was really interesting when you take this concept of sort of like the self, the unified self, and sort of like unification theory or like oneness. You've got basically just like total unification, which might be something like pure light or like a pure tone or something like that. And then everything, all of reality is kind of like this tree that branches off and gets more and more individuated from this one like light source or tone point. And I had this funny experience where I was just like sitting in my room and I was noticing all these different thoughts in my head that were arguing. They were going back and forth like, no, we should do this. No, we should do this. Like, whatever. I don't even remember what it was about, but just watching this argument in my head. and I just turned it all the way up. I like took the two parts inside of me that were arguing, and I like maxed out their volume and their speed. I had them argue faster and louder and faster and louder until it was just so fast and loud that it all like just like and created it, like unified. It went so fast and started to get so loud that they just like wrapped around each other, and it just created this tone, this pure like really high-pitched tone. And it was like I was sitting in bliss, because I took these two things that are actually like one thing and I took those two individuated parts and I kind of maxed them out to where they like became one thing again. And you can kind of think of like all of creation as the opposite process of what I did. I took these different voices that were really individuated, and I basically went through this process of making it all go so fast that it unified. And you can think of, you know, the opposite, where you got unification and then you slow it down to a point where things start to like split, and basically polarity starts to begin, and it just like starts to get more and more polarized over time as like these different polarizations and splits kind of explore each other and explore splits within those splits, and they get slower and they have different desires and things like that. So anyways, that's all just some food for thought. And you know, I don't share these concepts because I think that they're true necessarily. They are things that I generally, you know, like there's some core aspects of them that I believe are probable, and you know, it's kind of like things that I'm hanging on to. But mostly I just like to take these ideas which feel true to me on some level, and I just like to explore them, and I have a lot of fun philosophizing about different things and sharing them. And really I hope that what you get out of it is just more of like an open mind, and like more open to possibilities, and maybe concepts that you hadn't really thought of, or that are just kind of like pretty far out but could almost be true. And then you get to like play around with those thoughts yourself and see what feels true for you, and what you resonate with. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun talking about it here with you. This has been a pretty long episode, I think, compared to most of them on my podcast. Usually my podcast episodes are only about 20 minutes. I think this one's going to be a bit longer than that. But yeah, it's something that I really feel passionately talking about and enjoy talking about. It's just like so much fun for me. So hope you enjoyed it. Leave me a comment on what you think, and you know, bounce ideas off of me. I hope that you're having a really beautiful day, and I'll talk with you again soon.